Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Southern Area Forum. I'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us, and hopefully we're going to have discussions first from different members, different officers, and then we will carry on and have questions at the end. So I will like to introduce Paul Wilson as regards the council, please.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Southern Area Forum. What I'm going to do for the next few minutes is just give you an overview of some of the projects that the council's been working on during the last 18 months to 2 years. Clearly, it's been a difficult time for all concerned with the COVID-19 pandemic. And despite the fact that the council's been heavily engaged in dealing with the pandemic itself, there's still an awful lot of good work which the council has been undertaking on behalf of Derbyshire Dales communities. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of what some of those projects have been. So in terms of our clean and green team, we're very proud of the fact that for many years we've managed to achieve green flag status for our principal park in Hall Lees at Matlock. But for the second year in a row, we've actually achieved green flag status for Bath Gardens in Bakewell. This is part of an ongoing programme of improving all of our main parks, and we're certainly working towards improvements to Tashbourne Recreation Ground in order that we can actually submit that park for green flag status next year. So a lot of hard work taking place by our clean and green team, and hopefully you are seeing that as you visit our parks across the district. Clearly, this year is a very important year for Her Majesty the Queen as she celebrates the Platinum Jubilee. So as part of those celebrations, we are actually going to be looking to encourage events across the whole of the Derbyshire Dales. We are not proposing a single event because we think it's very important that communities have the opportunity to celebrate in their own way, in their own particular village or town. So we're going to be looking to support as many opportunities as we can for local events to take place. And there's a report going to be considered by the council's policy committee tomorrow evening, whereby the council will be asked to consider making a financial grant to town and parish councils who wish to participate in this way. So please have a look at that, and there are lots of details published on our website. In terms of work that our community development team has been undertaking, during the Christmas and January holiday period, we ran a series of events, including a holiday activity and food programme. So we've recently been awarded some funding to assist with this, and it's aimed at children who are on free school meals, and the team is continuing to develop a programme throughout this February half-term period. So again, lots of work taking place in the community to support some of our more vulnerable residents and clients. As part of our health initiative, the District Council does an awful lot in terms of promoting healthy lifestyles. So in January, we did actually stage a number of events in our parks in Ashbourne and Matlock, family-friendly events, which were very, very well attended despite the weather. And we are also going to be organising fun events in Bakewell and Worksworth in March and April this year. So once again, further details available on the Council's website. The economy of the Derbyshire Dales is one of the District Council's top priorities, and we're very pleased to have recently launched our Invest in Derbyshire Dales branding initiative. So this is to support existing businesses or encourage new businesses to actually grow and relocate into the Derbyshire Dales. There's an awful lot of information on there to provide support and startup advice and guidance. So anybody who either has an existing business or is planning on starting a new business, please take the opportunity to have a look at that. And if you need any further advice or assistance, then please don't hesitate to contact our economic development team. Despite the fact that the Matlock Bath illuminations had to be cancelled during 2020, we're very pleased to have been able to host the event in 2021. Whilst it was a reduced attendance because of the COVID-19 situation, nonetheless, it was extremely successful, record attendances, were enjoyed, and we're going to be taking some of the lessons learned from that experience into our planning for the 2022 event. One of the more recent initiatives that we've recently launched across all of our pay and display car parks is pay by phone. Now, many residents may well have seen this in other local authorities up and down the country, but it's basically an opportunity to actually pay for your car parking on an app and then extend that car parking should you be unable to return back to the meter to renew your ticket. So already, despite the fact it's only been launched since October, we've processed more than 43,000 transactions with £129,000 worth of income generated. So again, it's making it more easy to actually visit the Derbyshire Dales and actually stay longer. The District Council is very keen on promoting climate change initiatives, and one such initiative that we have been working on for a little while now is our biodiversity project. So this is basically a project which has involved us working with numerous areas across the district. We've piloted a series of projects which have involved looking at sites in Hathersage, Bradwell, Hartington, Matlock, Wirksworth, Wardlow, Beeley, Cromford and Doveridge. Basically, it's about how we can manage our grass verges, roadside verges in a much more environmentally sensitive way. So we've had some fantastic results so far, and we're going to be taking those results forward into this season, and again hoping to expand that particular project. So hopefully you'll see the benefits of that this summer. In terms of Ashbourne specific projects, we're very proud and pleased with the success of the Ashbourne Pavilion in the Park initiative, which has very much been led by the community sports groups in Ashbourne. District Council has been a supporter of this project from the start, and we've also assisted in terms of providing some finance towards this. But by and large, this is a community success story, and it's fantastic that the project is now nearing a conclusion, and we'll be seeing the benefits of that opening in the very near future. One of the significant projects that we've been involved in for many years now is the Matlock Hurst Farm Regeneration Project. So this is a project which started off on a relatively small scale, but the success over recent years has been tremendous as we've managed to actually lever in significant funding from either government or other funding sources to actually grow and develop the project. So again, an awful lot of information on the council's website about this, but it's all about the District Council playing its role in the community and improving the local community for residents. We have a number of estates projects which are going to be taking place this year. A couple of notable ones are the replacement of a shelter in Matlock Bath. There's going to be further works in Hawleys Park in Matlock, and there's also works taking place in Ashbourne as well on the back of the very successful project which took place with the Ashbourne branch of the Royal British Legion to completely refurbish the Ashbourne Memorial Park gates. I think anybody who saw the photographs of that can't fail but be impressed by the actual outcome of that. So excellent partnership working with the District Council and the British Legion, and a real success story for Ashbourne. Again, just referring back to our climate change initiatives, my colleague will speak a little bit more about that in a little while this evening, but we have also been very successful in our Green Homes Grant Programme. So this is a programme whereby financial assistance has been secured to actually improve the external wall insulation of numerous properties across the district. We've had success at Matlock. There are other projects in Hogneston and Ashbourne, and we've recently been very successful in attracting just over £900,000 worth of additional grant funding to assist with the energy efficiency ratings of local homes. So again, an awful lot of work taking place which makes a real difference to people's lives. One of our significant corporate projects is the provision of a new cinema at Bakewell Road in Matlock. And for anyone who knows this site, it's the site of the old market hall, which has been underused for quite some period of time now. Planning permission has now been granted for the cinema project, and we are working very closely with a potential operator and also local community groups to actually bring this project to fruition. So there are some big decisions to be taken in the next few weeks, and that project is on track to be delivered in 2023. Affordable housing has for many years been one of the council's top priorities, and once again, we've been successful in securing provision for affordable homes on the former Dove Garage site in Ashbourne. That will be starting on site imminently. There are also other schemes in Matlock which are currently taking place on the back of other recent success stories in Bakewell. So again, the District Council playing its part in delivering more affordable homes for local people. I won't say too much more about climate change, but climate change is clearly one of the District Council's top priorities, and we're going to be playing our part this summer with a series of events whereby we're going to be encouraging a fantastic homes exhibition, which will be travelling throughout the various towns and villages of the Derbyshire Dales. So there will be a lot more information on the Council's website in the next few weeks and months. But actually, there's also been a real success story in that the Council has been recognised as a top performer in terms of its response to the UK climate emergency. So whilst there's still an awful lot to do, we're making really good progress. In terms of general service updates, we clearly continue to provide a lot of services across all communities in the Derbyshire Dales from our Clean and Green team. We also are continuing to see the success of our investment in our customer relationship management system, which launched in April of 2020. And this is all about trying to make it easier for residents and visitors to interact with the District Council and access more service requests online rather than have to pick up the phone and speak with a customer services advisor. So as part of our digital transformation programme, we continue to invest in our services to improve them for local residents. We also continue to provide key services such as homelessness and housing advice, something which has been extremely important, particularly through the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also playing our part in terms of accommodating the first Afghan refugees as part of the UK resettlement programme. I've mentioned affordable housing, and council housing plays a part in that, following the decision of the District Council to actually become a social landlord again after many, many years. And we have now started to invest in a number of schemes across the district. We've also created and managed the Welcome Back Fund, which was a national initiative to try and get people back into our town centres following the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's been tremendous success stories across all towns and villages in terms of the Local Projects Fund, which is a fund each individual elected member has to actually support local community projects within their particular area. Particularly to Ashbourne is the completion of the Ashbourne Airfield Link Road. Again, this is extremely important to the economy of the Derbyshire Dales, and is something which the District Council has been working very closely on with the County Council and the landowner for many, many years. So it's very encouraging to now see that coming to fruition, and that airfield link road will be opened very, very soon. So thank you very much. I'll pass on to my colleague, Karen Henriksson.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation. I'm just going to ask, Raz has just had a word with me saying about if there was a question now, so just if there was anybody who had a question to ask Paul, is there a possibility of raising your hand and we can bring you in to put the question to Paul? Many thanks.
I can't see any hands up, Chair, so should we move on to Karen's presentation?
Okay then, thank you. Right, at the moment the questions aren't there, so we're going to move on to Karen Henriksson, who's going to talk about the proposal of spending 22-23. Many thanks, Karen, if you wouldn't mind.
Good evening, everybody. I'm the Director of Resources at the Derbyshire Dales District Council and the Chief Finance Officer. I'm here this evening to talk to you about the proposed budget for the coming financial year 22-23, and also the proposed council tax increase. One of the things we're trying to do tonight is to seek your views on our budget and council tax increase. The good news is that we're not proposing any cuts in service for 22-23. This slide is provided to give you an indication of how we spend the funding that we receive through council tax and so on. You can see that the biggest part of our spending is, as you might expect, on waste and recycling. That accounts for around 31% of our spending. The next biggest sector is what we've called clean, green and safe. That accounts for around 20% of our spending, and that includes maintaining the parks, keeping the streets clear of litter, and also antisocial behaviour. These percentages do include a reallocation of overheads. The next slide shows you how we receive our income to fund those services. So you can see that the biggest part of our income actually comes from the sales fees and charges that we set and that you pay. That accounts for £8.4 million or 46% of our income. Council tax is the next biggest element, accounting for 38%, and government grants follow at 9% and business rates at 7%. This next slide shows the proposed capital expenditure that will be put forward for approval at the council meeting on the 3rd of March. Capital expenditure is on the purchase or improvements of assets, so vehicles, buildings, and so on. The earlier slide that I showed you for revenue expenditure, that was associated with day-to-day running costs. So for our capital expenditure on assets, the largest part of that goes on housing. Affordable housing is one of the council's priority areas. And the next biggest spend is actually on economic regeneration. So in order to fund that level of spending, we've increased some fees and charges, but you'll be pleased to know we've frozen pay and display charges at car parks. For the fees and charges that we have increased, in general, apart from those for bulky waste collections, the fee increases range from 3.1% to 4.5%, which is under the current rate of inflation, which is at 5.4% at the moment. So we're proposing as well a council tax increase of 1.94% for 2022-23. As I just mentioned, the current rate of CPI inflation is 5.4%. So our proposed increase is well below that. The current rate of inflation is anticipated to increase perhaps to 7% during the year. So we are planning to absorb some of that inflationary increase and won't be passing it all on to our residents. This slide shows the impact of a 1.94% on the level of the council tax. So Derbyshire Dales District Council's increase is 1.94%. That needs to be considered and is put for approval by council members at the council meeting on the 3rd of March. If they do approve it, it will result in an increase of £4.25 for a Band D property, and that works out around 8 pence a week for a Band D property. If you're in a Band A property, the increase works out around 5 pence a week, and a Band H property around 16 pence a week. You might want to know how we're going to spend that extra council tax collected. We've calculated that it'll raise around £130,000, sorry. And our draft budget for 22-23 includes an extra £150,000 that we plan to spend on economic development. So that's associated with projects to assist regeneration that we hope will improve prosperity in the district. We received quite a good government grant settlement for 22-23, but we can't be certain that that will continue because the government plans reviews of its grant funding. These have been underway for some time now and have been delayed by COVID, but there is a potential risk that the council's funding could be cut significantly. There are other service cost pressures such as addressing climate change and funding future fund capital projects. And also there's a risk of certain income levels being very volatile, such as that from recycling materials. The slide you can see now shows the council's medium-term financial plan. So these are our financial forecasts over the coming 5 years for day-to-day revenue expenditure. You can see at the bottom line the savings target that needs to be achieved in order to set a balanced budget. It's a requirement of the law that the council sets a balanced budget each year. So we project our income and expenditure over the years, and then we can plan in the intermediate terms to close any budget gap. You can see on the slide that we've got a balanced budget for 22-23, but then we need to make more savings for future years. The position should be clearer this time next year when the government's completed its reviews and informed the council of the new funding levels. And for that reason, we're not aiming at the moment to make any service cuts, because it might be that our forecasts are too pessimistic and that in fact we don't need to make the cuts if we receive an improved grant situation. And finally, the presentation is available now on the council's website. As I mentioned, the councils will meet on the 3rd of March to consider the proposed budget and the council tax increase. And if you'd like to let me have your views, please contact me at finance@derbyshiredales.gov.uk by the end of February. And I'll pass the key issues on to members at the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that presentation. I'm going to invite, is there anybody who wishes to ask a question at this moment in time? Can you please raise your hand and then I can let you in. Okay. Don't appear to see any hands up. With that being the case at the moment, I'd like to now move on to the levelling up. Are we okay, Tommy? We can't see any hands, can you? So I'll move on to the levelling up fund and move over to Steve Capes, please.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So this is just a brief presentation updating you attendees on the government's Levelling Up Fund, which offers something like between 5 and 20 million per district for capital infrastructure. It's part of a multi-billion-pound national scheme that the government introduced, announced last year. The district council has said that it's going to bid to round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund, and the government hasn't told us when round 2 actually will take place. They've just said it's going to be later in the spring. So sometime later in the spring, they'll tell us what the timetable is. But the expectation is that they will do that, and then we'll have just a couple of months to submit bids to the government by late spring, maybe early summer 2022. So it's for capital infrastructure. It's for visible things that the government says are things that towns in particular will need. But there's various criteria to go with the bid, which I won't go through in detail, but particularly stuff in town centres is a key theme. The District Council last year did agree to have a market town focus, and that it would have to have a coherent package. And in that regard, I wrote to all the 4 market towns in the Derbyshire Dales last year, and I had a good response from at least 2 of them, Ashbourne being one. So if we look at the next slide, I can say a little bit more about some of the lessons from the first round of the Levelling Up Fund. And what we found from the first round is that actually most of the winning bids were for single towns. There were only very few that were actually for a package of more than one town. There were some, but not very many. And one of the key features is that for a successful bid, you need to have strong bid throughout. There's various factors in success there. It needs to be coherent strategy. So you can't just put together things that you want to do. There's plenty of things that in the Derbyshire Dales we and our towns do want to do, but for the bid to succeed, it has to fit together in a way that the government makes sense to them. The key thing is that it has to be ready to deliver, because the time scale for spending this money to do stuff in town centres is only a couple of years. So for that to be the case, land probably has to be publicly owned, it has to have permissions in place, and you need to have at least costings lined up for what contracts might cost. So for the Derbyshire Dales, we are restricted in some respects because we as a district council don't actually have much council controlled land, and we haven't got many shovel ready projects, hence writing to our partner towns to see what they've got planned. So the next slide will tell us a bit about the projects that have come forward. So in Matlock, we had some projects come forward, not just from the District Council, but also from Matlock Community Vision, a community group there, based around the scheme that Paul mentioned earlier, the cinema development on Bakewell Road. But for perhaps more relevant tonight, we've had some good schemes come forward from Ashbourne Town Team, supported by Ashcom and Ashbourne Town Council as well. Multiple schemes. I think they would agree as well that in many cases those schemes are less advanced than some of the Matlock schemes, but there is a lot to commend them. There's a really good potential package of schemes there. There's a good, what we'd call a strategic case, but some of the difficulties are that there's a range of landowners, a range of planning permissions, a range of funding, and none of them have got the business case is written up into the form that the government requires. So because we only must choose projects that can meet this sort of 2-month timescale, we're now working with, and we've got some consultants in place to work with Ashbourne Town Team to help develop those projects and start to develop those business cases for them. So I've mentioned the timescale, and I've also said that the District Council is supporting Ashbourne and at the moment supporting Matlock as well. So both sets of bids we're getting external support to do, not just assessment, but also support to write them. But there's a couple of key points to make. One is that whatever goes forward to the Levelling Up Fund as a bid, success isn't guaranteed. You know, the government will judge it by its own criteria. It'll judge it against probably many hundreds of other bids from elsewhere in the country. So success isn't guaranteed. But perhaps a key point for us is that we in the District Council regard Levelling Up Fund as just one step in our regeneration work. So although we may put 1 or maybe 2 schemes forward to the Levelling Up Fund, and maybe 1 or both or none of those will actually get funding. Whatever doesn't go forward or whatever doesn't win funding, we will work with them to make them more bid ready, so that whatever next funding scheme comes along from the government, they will be in a better position to apply for it. We'll turn the really good ideas that we've had from Ashbourne into sound bids, whether they are levelling up fund bids or bids for something else in the future. We are keen to work them so that they're ready for future funding, and that's a key point from us, from a district council. It's you know, we are, I suppose, put it this way, we're backing both horses at the moment. So any questions, I'm happy to answer them, Chair.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that. Are there any questions anybody would like to raise at this moment in time?
I can't see any hands, Chair, so if you're happy to move on to Tim's presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay then, thanks Steve. So we'll move on now to Tim Braun on the climate change. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the public. The slide there says that I'm Joe Hill. I'm actually a very poor substitute for Joe Hill. Joe Hill's our climate change officer, and she sits within my team. I'm the Director of Regulatory Services for the Council, and as mentioned, although climate change is a corporate issue, it's housed within that particular directorate. This presentation is aimed at giving an update on the progress we've made to reaching our net zero target. The Council did pledge to reach net zero for its own emissions by 2030. And we're also going to give an overview of some of the initiatives we've got ongoing across the district. We know we've not got everything perfect yet, but we are quite pleased with some of the things that we've started. So our journey towards net zero started back in May 2019 when the Council declared a climate emergency and decided that it would pledge to become net zero in terms of its own emissions by 2030. One of the first things we did was to commission a piece of work undertaken by a consultancy called ClearLead to look at what the opportunities were to reach there. And that piece of work did come up with one pathway to net zero by 2030. It told us that it was possible to do that work and suggested a way that we might get there. At the top of the slide, you can see that we've actually reduced our in-house emissions from 2019-20 to 2020-21. We're quite pleased about that, whilst accepting that some of the reasons for those reductions may be to do with the pandemic, reduced use of fuel, for example. The slide there shows some of the projects some of the headline projects that would enable us to reach 2030 net zero. So one of the major sources of our own emissions are our buildings. We don't now own very many buildings around the district, or very many big buildings around the district. So the three main buildings that we're looking at the moment are the Town Hall in Matlock, the Agricultural Business Centre in Bakewell, and the depot that we keep out just north of Darley-Dale in Northwood. We're very pleased that we've been awarded not quite £600,000 worth of public sector decarbonisation scheme funding to help us to reduce carbon emissions in those buildings. Those kind of works relate to basically getting rid of gas heating, replacing it with electric, which we can buy as a renewable source. Also looking at solar generation at the depot and at the Agricultural Business Centre, replacement of windows in the Town Hall, and energy efficiency improvements. The reason we're not doing a solar installation at the Town Hall is there is already one there and has been in place for a number of years. All those works taken together should amount to a 31% emissions reduction at those buildings. The funding that we've got has enabled us to reduce our own funding into a much larger project. So basically it's a win-win situation. We get a bigger project that actually involves less of the council's own money. One of the other areas that we've got to look at are our vehicles. Our vehicles, the vehicles that we own and operate, amount to around about 44% of the total council emissions. So we've begun work on the scheme to help replace those vehicles with electric alternatives where those alternatives exist. The first thing that we've had done is to undertake an analysis of the fleet and look at what's feasible in terms of electrifying. We've had Nottingham City Council's help with that. Nottingham City Council are a leading authority in this kind of work. They've also identified some opportunity for operational change in the way we use some of those vehicles. And they're going to help us with getting the infrastructure that we need at the depot in order to charge those vehicles and to maintain them. We'll need some alterations in the workshop. The pictures there show what the depot could look like with the photovoltaic panels on top of it. This work doesn't come cheap. There is an uplifting cost required in order to replace our fleet with electric vehicles, as opposed to replacing them with more traditional alternatives. And we're working our way through that. That scheme's in early days, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to take it forward relatively rapidly once we've got the infrastructure sorted. One of the other areas that we're looking at is our opportunity to generate our own electricity through up to 5 sites that we're looking at around the district. We need to do this to reach net zero because we're always going to have some residual emissions. So producing our own electricity will enable us to inset those emissions through the generation of electricity, green electricity on those sites. We're looking at 5 sites in total. There's one of them in Ashbourne, and that picture shows where the Ashbourne site is. And what we've done is we've commissioned consultants to help us to produce detailed technical and financial feasibility studies for each of those 5 sites. Those studies will enable us to know whether it's technically possible to generate electricity on those sites and export it to the grid. They'll also tell us how much those schemes will cost and what the return on those schemes will be, because there will be opportunities to sell that electricity back into the grid. In addition to the buildings that the council maintains and runs itself, we also remain in ownership of the 4 leisure centres around the district. Members of the public may be aware that whilst Freedom Leisure operate those services on our behalf, the buildings remain in the council's ownership. We've maintained good working relations with Freedom in terms of improving energy efficiency of each of those centres, and we're actually nearly completed another public sector decarbonisation scheme project at Ashbourne Leisure Centre, which is a £734,000 scheme to decarbonise the heating there, install solar PV and put in a building energy management system. That work's due to complete at the end of March, and we're very pleased about the progress with that. As the slide says, those works should result in an emission reduction of 56% in that particular building on completion. So a very worthwhile scheme. In addition to the sort of harder works that we're doing there, some of the softer works that are ongoing are listed on this slide. One of the very few benefits of the pandemic has been the rapid shift to agile working and more energy efficient ways of working in relation to our own workforce. The fact we're able to hold this forum on Zoom is one example of that kind of working. We've also managed to get the vast majority of our senior leadership at the council, our senior officers, through carbon literacy training, which is a very detailed day-long training session about the impacts of climate change and how we can all help to reduce those impacts or mitigate against them. We're now proposing a 3rd session, which we're hoping to run mainly for elected members, whilst mopping up those members of the senior management team who haven't been able to attend. All council reports with a decision that has a climate impact are now required to undertake a climate change impact assessment as well. Those impact assessments are published on the reports and are available to the public. And they're basically intended to enable officers to consider the impacts of the proposals they're making and for members to make decisions knowing that those impacts have been considered. We're working on a sustainable procurement policy. That's going through the process at the moment. We're also working with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust in relation to natural flood management schemes. That's a little bit more difficult than it might be by virtue of something Steve mentioned, which is that we don't now have much council land on which to undertake that work, but we're one of a number of partners who can help to make that a reality. Paul mentioned earlier the biodiversity project in relation to verges. We've also got the upcoming requirement to consider biodiversity net gain as part of planning applications. And we're working with colleagues around the county to make sure that we've got a system in place that will enable us to work that new requirement as best as anybody can. So we've talked a lot about emissions from the council's own buildings and its own fleet. However, there is a much larger inventory of emissions which relates to the district as a whole. And as you can see, the total emissions for the Derbyshire Dales amount to just over 907,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. There are a lot of sources of those emissions. Livestock is a very big source of emission in our district, as is transport. However, one area where the district council is able to make a positive impact is in relation to dwellings, residential buildings. Paul mentioned earlier about the schemes that we've got in place to reduce carbon emissions from buildings and reduce the energy demand in those buildings. And I'll come on to a bit more about those on the following slides. So in relation to housing, we have been very successful in attracting funding in to help decarbonise those houses. That has a knock-on effect of improving energy efficiency. This is a scheme that was started by my colleague in housing, Rob Coggins, and is now being carried on by Joe. We've been successful in obtaining funding in at least 3 of the funding schemes that have been announced. And we're now working up a new scheme, which is intended to deal with 2 sources of poor housing. One is an expansion of our existing scheme, mainly around external wall insulation, improving lofts, helping to improve the energy efficiency of homes in the main towns. We've also got funding now, which is specifically aimed at off-gas communities. So we're looking to expand that kind of work into the rural communities. We suspect that we're going to have to concentrate on 1 or 2 communities at a time in order to get the economies of scale that are required to bring contractors in and make those work. But we will be hoping to expand that as time goes by. In addition, we're working with Platform Housing as our major social housing provider at another funding scheme, which is called the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Whilst that will be for Platform to bid for and deliver, we're working with them to try and make sure that our schemes align with theirs. There's a further scheme which is looking at energy efficiency in the private rented sector. That's more of a advisory and then enforcement scheme, and as a consequence is being run by our environmental health team who deal with private housing standards around the district. Pictures there are some of the schemes that we've got ongoing, that we've either completed or got ongoing. The picture in the bottom left is of Hogneston, which is an ongoing scheme. The one in the top left is a row of almshouses in Matlock, which is a particularly innovative scheme that Rob's led on, and which I believe is completing very shortly. The whole scheme, every single one of those properties will have been improved. We're doing some work to try and help stimulate the electric vehicle market in the district. Our main role, as we see in relation to that, is making sure that there are public charging points available. As we previously talked about, there are charging points in a number of our car parks now, and we're doing further work with the County Council to look at demand for electric charging points and how they might be provided in the public realm, not just in car parks. That's the partnership approach that's mentioned at the bottom of this slide in relation to the electric vehicle strategy. We're doing work around community engagement. Again, Paul mentioned the Fantastic Homes exhibition. That's a picture of it on the side there. That vehicle was out in Ashbourne Market last week, along with Joe, and we're extending those exhibitions around the district. We'll build on that, not just in the main market towns, but taking them out to the more rural communities when we can as well. Some of the other work that we're doing is trying to encourage some other community groups to, or trying to help other community groups to progress their own climate change ambitions. We're working with a number of communities in relation to funding from the Rural Community Energy Fund. Some of that money has been available to develop schemes in places like Matlock. We're looking at working with Brassington and with Tideswell as well. So there are a number of schemes around the area. So that's a brief run through what we're doing in relation to climate change work. Any questions? I'm happy to try and take them.
Thank you very much for that, Tim. I do believe Mr. Dobbs would like to put a question forward, please.
Thank you, Chair. Tim, you showed a slide of ground-based solar for Ashbourne, in which an area was highlighted in quite a bright green colour and labelled in the bottom allotment gardens. It is, of course, currently lots of allotment gardens. Is this really the site for the ground-based solar?
Thanks, Mr. Dobbs. No, it wasn't the allotment bit. It's the land to the northeast northwest, I beg your pardon, northwest of the site, which is in the district council's ownership. It was gifted over by Nestle many years ago. At the moment, that land isn't used for anything. We're certainly not proposing to build to put solar panels on the allotments at the moment. Well, not at any time. We're certainly not proposing that. It's a feasibility study at this stage as well, Mr. Dobbs. So we've got consultants going out to look at the possibility of doing something on that site, along with 4 other sites around the district. That particular one has the benefit, if you can put it in that way, of having the sewage works nearby. So the chances are that there will be a good link into the electricity supply, which will enable us to export to the grid, we hope.
Thank you. Can I continue?
As far as I'm concerned, yes,
By all means.
Thank you. You're aware that the sewage work has its own solar farm on the other side?
We are, yes, and that's another reason why we're hopeful that that it will be a feasible site. The finance is one thing, but technical feasibility is one of the things that we really hope to bottom through this study. We're aware that one of the sites that we're looking at has already been looked at by a community energy group, and there's a suggestion there that connection into the grid will be very, very expensive. We're hoping that some of the others, perhaps including this one, will be much more realistic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbs. Is there anybody else wishing to pose any questions to Tim at this moment in time? Okay, I don't believe there are. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, Tim, and I'm going to move over and invite Garry Purdy, the leader of the District Council, to put a statement out and say a few words. Thank
you, Chair. Well, good evening, and thank you for attending the Southern Area Community Forum this evening. I think without doubt the past 2 and a bit years have been the most testing for our society, perhaps since the Second World War, with the floods in Matlock occurring in November 2019, and which resulted in the sad loss of life of Annie Orr. And of course, the floods yet again over this last weekend, which were quite devastating. Then in early 2020, we started the first of the lockdown periods due to COVID pandemic. And to make matters worse, circa 100,000 HGV drivers were short in the country, which affected many supply lines, such as food and fuel. Serco was not immune to the loss of HGV drivers due to a national shortage or to their staff suffering the effects of COVID. Life has not been normal in many areas for the past 2 and a bit years. I want therefore to pay tribute to our hardworking and dedicated staff for all of the achievements as outlined by the Chief Executive. And I know that many of you have gone beyond the normal call of duty and have worked evening and weekend hours in order to get the job done. And this was especially so during the floods in 2019, another flood or 2 in between time, and again over this last weekend. And also in getting business grants out on time to our business in Derbyshire Dales. On behalf of the District Council, I would like to apologise for the significant disruptions that many residents across the Derbyshire Dales have experienced to their waste collection service in recent months. Whilst this situation is unacceptable to all concerned, it is important to have a clear and accurate understanding of the context and, most importantly, the actions taken by the District Council to address the problems that we have encountered. As residents will be aware from national, regional and local media coverage, there was and still is an acute shortage of HGV drivers currently working in the UK, which has impacted upon every sector of the economy, from supermarkets, home deliveries, catering, hospitality, road haulage and other service sectors that rely upon this service. This is not an excuse, it is a fact, and Serco are not immune to these impacts. Notwithstanding this, the service that our residents have received has been simply unacceptable. And residents are quite right to express their dissatisfaction on Serco's performance, which is shared by elected members and officers. In response to residents' concerns, last October, the Council agreed to commission an independent inquiry into Serco's delivery of the 2020 waste contract. This review has now been concluded, and the report is due to be considered at the 17th of February meeting. A copy of the independent review report is now available on the council's website. In summary, the report concludes that there has been an incomplete delivery of the contract requirements by Serco, and there is a need for significant improvements to take place. Despite the council taking all proportionate and necessary steps to manage the challenges, performance has been acceptable, and on behalf of the council, I sincerely apologise for this. Quite rightly, residents want to know when they can expect service delivery to be fully resumed, and in this regard, I do give an assurance that officers are working hard with senior Serco representatives to put the necessary arrangements in place as quickly as possible to address the ongoing challenges, some of which, though, are outside the direct control of either the District Council or Serco. At the end of 2019, we received a report from an independent external review body on the workings of the council, and we were adjudged to be an excellent council and with strong leadership. It is that one team effort in pulling together that has seen us through these very difficult times, and I know that we will concentrate now on serving our public to the best of our ability. I am hopeful that normal service can be resumed as soon as possible, and that we can engage more with the public and more in person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy, for that. And right, I would like to ask the question again. Is there anybody else wishing to pose any more questions for what we've had presentations on tonight, or anything else for that matter? Mr. Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I think I gave notice of this question. I was rather hoping this evening it would be possible to provide those viewers, listeners in Ashbourne with an update on progress in devising an air quality action plan for the air quality management area that was declared in April last year for certain parts of Ashbourne. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move to Tim. Can you shed some light onto that, Tim, please?
Yes, I can. A bit of good news, I hope, Mr. Dobbs. First of all, that there is a report going to our Community and Environment Committee tomorrow on this subject. However, we have had an update today from their County Council colleagues where they've now published their Cabinet report into proposed measures in Ashbourne. I have to say I received an email about that. I've been down to London today, and when I got back, I very quickly read it, so I've not read it in detail. But I've received an email giving a link to that report today, and there are a number of measures proposed in it. It is available on their website and worth a look. I can certainly make that link more widely available when I'm back in work again tomorrow, Mr. Dobbs. So a number of measures are proposed. We now need to look at those and work those up into an action plan. As before, I would propose that we would engage with the Town Council and the Town team, as well as the County Council in those conversations. But that shortlist has now been made available.
Thank you. Can I continue? Is that okay, Chair? Thank you. I have read it. I was given notice of it early afternoon. I have had a chance to look through it. I must admit, first sight, it does seem that the County Council are really rather calling the shots on this one. And can I pose to you a possibly rather difficult question? If you decide that other actions might be possible, what leeway is there for the District Council, who have the responsibility for creating the plan, to take their own path?
It is a good question, Mr. Dobbs. We've kind of skirted around this issue a couple of times before. It's an interesting situation, this, in that the responsibility for producing the action plan rests with the District Council as the authority that created the air quality management area. However, the responsibility for most of the actions in this particular case falls to the County Council as a highways authority, because the vast majority of the pollution is coming from the highway. If there are any other measures that are within our scope in order to implement, then I'm sure that we'll be looking to include those in the action plan. Like yourself and colleagues in the town team and the Town Council, we need to absorb what has actually been put out there by the County Council and have those conversations. But certainly if there are other things that we're able to do, then we'll be looking to do those.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Have you got any other questions, Mr. Dobbs? I'll take it as read. So I'd like to move over to Councillor Michelle Morley, please. Question. You're on mute, Councillor Morley, if you are wishing to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. It's not a question, it's a statement. I just want to say that I don't know how many people of the Brailsford area ward are perhaps watching this evening, but I'd just like to say there are so many different facets to the council's activities of the officers and the ward members, and we're doing our very best and will continue to do our best for our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Morley. Is there anybody else wishing to make any comments or ask any other questions? I can't see anybody indicating that they wish to speak. No. Okay, so with that then, I'd like to say thank you very much to all the officers for putting their presentation out. Anybody who has been involved or watching, if you do have any burning questions and you want to put them over, then please do email them through to the District Council, where they will go to the appropriate officers to get these answered for you. I again would like to reiterate what Councillor Purdy has said and apologise for the residents of all of Derbyshire Dales for the issues with the waste management. With that, I don't see anybody else wishes to speak. So I'd like to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and good evening. Thank you. Good night.
Night.